Welcome to Cinemaholics. We're back this week for a bonus episode of a major review. We are the Major Motion Podcast, Cinemaholics, where we discuss the biggest, best films coming to theaters, streaming online, and more. And I'm John Negroni, of course, and he's Will Ashton. Hey, Will, say hi.
Hey, so that's is that our official catchphrase, or is that just a bit you're going with?
Official catchphrase? I don't understand, Will, what you're talking about.
You say this is the Major
Motion Podcast.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we are, right?
I mean, if you want to be, sure.
See, I've been saying it for a few weeks, and I never ran it by. I never mentioned it to you. But the thing was like, when is Will going to say something about it? So this has been an experiment, sure. And it took you like 3-4 weeks.
I mean, I've noticed. I've just kind of let it slide.
I know you were noticing it. My thing was, when is he going to say something? Like, what is he going to like finally overcome that like meekness of like, all right, I need to mention this to John because he's doing something. Like, he's up to something.
Is this like, are you going to keep doing it now, or are you just waiting for me to say something about it?
I want to keep doing it. I like saying it. I like it because, okay, here's my pitch. We're going to do it live on the air, okay? Major Motion Podcast. I think it's fun, and Cinemaholics should be fun. That's my pitch.
Sure. Yeah. Reminds me of, I don't know if you ever knew this, at the beginning of the show, like when we started Cinemaholics, I was going to do a bit, and obviously this has run its course, and I gave up on it long ago, but I was gonna start each episode with like a different way of saying hi, be like hola or like howdy. And
I've heard that on so many podcasts. I hate to say it.
Really?
Yeah.
Where they do a different way of saying hello each time.
Yeah, they do. And
well, this is like 2017, so I mean, I'm not saying this bit was fresh.
I'm saying this was even before 2017. I remember that being a thing on a few podcasts. It's like, oh, how many different things are they going to do to, Well, sorry, Will.
Sorry, I'm not original enough for you.
It's okay. You don't have to apologize. It's not like I'm surprised.
Sure.
I'm just kidding.
I don't have the original vision that someone like Robert Eggers has when they.
That's true. Neither of us are.
Film,
we aren't a fraction of as creative as Robert Eggers. I think that is 1,000% the case. Are we going to talk about his filmography before we discuss his new film, The Northman? Is that what we're going to do?
Not a long filmography, so we can go through it pretty quickly.
We've talked about one of the movies on Cinemaholics, The Lighthouse, one of your favorite films of 2019. If not your favorite, it might have been your number one, if I'm recalling.
No, it wasn't my number one, but I do think
Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets?
No, that was 2020. 2019, okay. I think I put like Marriage Story or something in 2019.
Oh yeah, maybe it was Marriage Story. Okay.
Which, I mean, in retrospect, I like that movie a lot, but in retrospect, I mean, I'd probably put Lighthouse in my top 5. Like, I know I think I had like number 8. I'd probably put it like 5 or 4.
You know what? I'm going to look it up right now because like we're here, right? We have the internet. Let's just do it. Because I always keep track of this stuff. Yeah, because every time we do these like Cinemaholics like rankings and all this stuff, I always keep like a little record just for me and just for these moments, So I'm going to look for that. While I look for that, we didn't talk about The Witch together, right? That was 2016. Because you weren't. Yeah. I think we talked about it in Now Conspiring, that podcast, but I don't think you were around.
You and me? Oh, you just mean you were like, and your co-hosts were talking about it.
Right. Like I think I might have talked about like with Adonis, Maria, like those folks. And I think I was one of the bigger fans of it. I don't remember where people landed, so I don't want to speak for anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, big Sundance hit.
Yeah.
That came out in 2015, or premiered 2015, but it didn't come out until like a year later. But that was a prime A24 style hit where like by any conventional measures, that is not a mainstream hit type of film, but they were smart in how they marketed it and how they appealed to an audience with that film. And they got like a very wide audience for it, which is, it was one of those.
It helped launch Anya Taylor-Joy's career. Absolutely.
Yeah. Turned her into a star. But it was, like one of those movies where it's like, can art house movies really kind of transcend the art house into the mainstream? That was like beginning of that kind of conversation. The Witch was certainly one of those films that sparked the conversation, and The Lighthouse did to a certain extent, though that movie,
I'd say at least much lesser extent.
Yeah, commercially that didn't hit the same height. So I think I prefer The Lighthouse over The Witch overall. I'm not quite sure where you stand.
I prefer The Witch because I think both movies are extraordinary, and I think they're both quite good. I mean, I remember my theatrical experience of watching The Witch was just such a game changer for me as somebody who was certainly like, I was not as into elevated horror folk tales, you know, because like we had gotten stuff like The Babadook at that point. We had gotten It Follows, you know, one of my favorite films of the previous year. But in terms of like this sort of like A24, let's sort of take the, the Puritan, or like take a Fable or something like that, and just really like amp it up in terms of the, not just the horror, but the unsettling, creeping atmosphere. That's something that I think The Witch really, helped pave the way for in the next few years to follow. And I appreciate Eggers because he goes from The Witch, which I just personally enjoy because I just like that story a bit more and I like that world a bit more. But I think like The Lighthouse is just such a great follow up to it. It's just so like bold of him to be like, now we're going to do something in black and white. We're going to tackle a totally different topic, but it's still absolutely his signature vision. I just think that's like one of the best ways for him to like sort of like the next step of his career. I'm going to say, because I looked it up. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
You're right that Marriage Story was your number 1. The Lighthouse was number 7. I think I had for you, The Lighthouse switched with Midsummer, because I knew you had Midsummer up there too. You had Midsummer as your number 2.
Was that number 2 or is that number 3?
It's number 2. I'm looking at it right now. You want me to run it by like your top 10 of 2019? Let's do it. The listeners might have forgotten. We did. So you had Ad Astra at 10.
Okay, good pick.
You had Climax at 9, which I still found kind of weird. I thought Climax would be like in your top 5, but
I don't know why you'd think that. But
me neither.
Okay.
But well, no, because I thought you liked it a lot more than other films.
I did. It's in the top 10.
Okay, and then number 8, same as me. We both had Us, the Jordan Peele film, in number 8, and then you had The Lighthouse at 7, Long Day's Journey into Night at 6, Uncut Gems at 5. Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood at 4, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood at 3, Midsummer at 2, and Marriage Story at 1. Good year for movies, man. That was
that was a good year. I didn't even have like Knives Out, or I mean, there were a bunch of movies that year. Farewell. I thought I might have Farewell into my top 10.
I had Farewell. I remember you were waffling between I think Farewell and your number 10. Yeah.
Ad Astra. Yep. I mean, I think I would still pick Ad Astra over that, but I don't know. Like I really like
you probably would have had Portrait of a Lady on Fire on there too.
Because I hadn't seen it by I would have had that on there.
And you didn't have Parasite, which was like, I remember a source of consternation.
Yeah, no, I've definitely grown more on Parasite. I mean, I really liked it at the time. I just wasn't sure if it was like a top 10 film. But, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, that was. Yeah.
The thing I like about your top 10s, Will, is like they always feel like you. Like they never feel like, just the sort of expected, film critic bro sort of curation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised how many horror movies I put in there that year.
It's good. Good time capsule, right?
Sure.
Okay, so we talked about The Witch and The Lighthouse. Again, yeah, I mean, you liked Lighthouse more than me, but I certainly liked it. I guess something was missing for The Lighthouse with me. I don't know. I loved the concept. I loved the execution, the black and white. I loved the framing of it, how boxy and uncomfortable it was. Robert Pattinson, my gosh, like what a year for him. He had that movie in High Life and Not Uncut Gems. I was thinking of Good Time. But no, he had those 2 movies. But Willem Dafoe, I mean, honestly, like looking at The Lighthouse, there's no like flaw or anything where I'm just like, well, this is the thing that brings the film down for me. Like there's nothing like that. I think it just comes down to The Lighthouse. I just, the movie ended. I walked out of the theater. I was like, man, that was a really cool movie. And it didn't do anything else to me. But I think it did to you, right?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I think they're kind of one and the same coin as far as like, The Witch is this very feminine story. It's a feminist tale, and the Lighthouse is more of a like goofy kind of, like you said, horror based tale of like masculinity and like this kind of pent up masculinity, as you're suggesting.
Wasn't The Witch also about masculinity, like the oppression of masculinity?
All 3 of them are about masculinity. Right. Yeah. But I mean, more directly so, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. For me, I mean, like I like The Witch. I certainly have grown to like it more upon reflection as well. Though I feel like The Witch's film, where it's like I like it, I can clearly see his vision, his sense of scope, like his reverence for a time period, the way he can make it really come to life again. It's all apparent in that film, and the groundwork is there. But I feel like with The Lighthouse, there is like a greater sense of command and more confidence as a filmmaker. He's more willing to get audacious and funny and weird with it in that film, and I feel like it is a true like step up. Not to say anything against The Witch. I like The Witch. I do, but I feel like The Lighthouse, like okay, like The Witch is good. The Lighthouse, where it's like, okay, truly Eggers is on the path to being a phenomenal filmmaker. And I think that trend continues with his latest film.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't disagree with your framing there, right? Like, even though I come away from it slightly different, I think that's all true. But yeah, I think one thing about Eggers that I think can sometimes be construed as like a flaw with his films is that sometimes I saw a little bit of this with the Northman. You know, we'll get into the Northman in a sec. We'll set it up for you listeners, but you know, I saw a few criticisms around the Northman being like, yeah, you know, I just feel like this Alexander Skarsgård performance. I just didn't feel like the soul of the character. I didn't feel like I understood him, or like he's just so quiet. Not enough dialogue really illuminates who he is. I think one thing that Eggers is really good at is he could have made a bomber of a silent film, because I think one thing that he's really good about is capturing the spectrum, the whole side of a character through silent expression.
Sure.
Because that is very much one of my favorite things about The Lighthouse. I think that like most of the acting is happening from the nonverbal side of those performances, especially with Pattinson. But also, I think you could just see those two characters gliding along that story as it gets more and more insane. And it's way less about what's not said than what is said. And I think that carries over into the Skarsgård performance. And I think for some people, it's a bit of a hill to climb. They might look at that and be like, I want, you know, a little bit more of like a crystallization sort of moment that gets that across. But I got to give it up to Eggers, because I think that's actually a feature. I like that his films are that accomplished, right? In terms of like not silent films that are kind of like silent films.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely a student of film. I mean, but as you suggested, someone who is able to take all these influences from classic literature, from different key niche points of interest, like you said, like films going back to German Expressionism, or like you said, silent film. Certainly his love of Nosferatu, a passion project for his that he's, I think, was going to do next, or is trying to do next. I know there was a bit of a stumbling block with that one, according to a recent interview, but certainly I feel like that's all well apparent. And I certainly agree with you as far as Alex Skarsgård's performance in this film. I actually think it's a little bit more subtle and more pronounced than I think some people are giving it credit.
You should say too. I mean, like, let's take a look at Eggers himself. You know, let's do a GQ profile on him, I guess. I don't know. He co-wrote this new film, like he co-wrote The Lighthouse. He didn't co-write The Witch, but The Lighthouse he co-wrote with Max Eggers. Familiar last name, right? I think that's his brother. And then he co-wrote The Northman with Sjón. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Sjón is like an Icelandic novelist and poet.
Yeah.
And frequently collaborates with Björk, who is in this film. Briefly, I think Björk just had like, one scene?
Yeah, cameo, but very good in it.
Yeah. Really cool moment in the movie. But yeah, Eggers, how old do you think Eggers is? Do you know how old this guy is?
I was going to mention, I read that New Yorker profile where they kind of talk about him.
Oh, okay. I didn't read that.
As thing. I think they said he was like 38.
38 years old, yeah. Isn't that crazy? And I think the Witch, right, takes place in New England. He's a New Hampshire-born guy. So, like, that kind of, you know, we've certainly seen that he has a sort of like Atlantic, you know, sort of mid-Atlantic / New England attention or focus in his movies. All three of his movies are kind of based around that, right? Because like Lighthouse is kind of like the Atlantic, and then I forget, was it like Maine or something, or Massachusetts? It was something along
New Hampshire was
the coast, right?
The setting of The Witch, right?
I don't remember exactly the set. Right? It was the Puritan. Yeah. I mean, it was around that area, sure. I don't think it was like Vermont, I guess, but it could have been Massachusetts, and I could just be forgetting. But yeah, and then the Northman, that's when we're getting into like the Icelandic sort of, okay, now we're in another country, but it's, I don't know, it's of a piece, right? It's like the ancestors of like a lot of those people, I guess. I don't know. I'm kind of certainly spewing pseudo history.
No, I know. It's like that sort of like almost like colloquial version, or like sort of almost like a primal in this case. Humanity, like this, like there's like a sense of ritual, place and time, but it's almost like primal in this case, like this sense of like colonies haven't fully been formed, like, you know, like there's like a real sense of danger that's in this film that I really like a lot. So yeah,
let's talk about
stuff. Yeah.
This is definitely his biggest budget film by a mile and a half. The Northman it's his first blockbuster. I think it's safe to call it a blockbuster. Its budget is big enough to deem it as such.
Oh yeah, and, I mean, almost $100 million, man. Like, yeah, if that's not a blockbuster, I mean,
right? Yeah. Yeah, like I was looking at it. It's like there's no official reporting that I'm seeing. It's a range between $70 and $90 million budget. So yeah, definitely in that realm, which is a lot of money for a non-IP, you know, movie, right?
Well, I mean, certainly, I think you could call the Scandinavian story that's based on, maybe like a true IP, like one of the first like
one of the OG true, IP,
Viking lores to pull from if you really want to get technical with it.
Is that the subtitle of this episode? The Northman, the OG IP.
Yeah, the OG IP. If you want to, I mean, that's up to you.
Yeah, we got to beat it somehow. So what we're alluding to there is the Northman is based on a Scandinavian folktale about a character named Amleth. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it helped inspire, I think mostly inspired Shakespeare's Hamlet, which would come many, many years later. So we are talking about one of the like foundational Western stories, right? Like this story takes place in 895 or something. So clearly like way before the Renaissance period, way before Shakespeare's time. And again, pseudo history. I'm doing my best here, but a lot of people recognize the Hamlet story. That's the one that was more famous, the one more spread about, in America in our time. Obviously, stuff like The Lion King has been, one of our major sort of touchstones of that story for the more current generations.
Sure.
So it's kind of funny. Robert Eggers is going back to the original.
Yeah. Was that ever confirmed, though, with Lion King? Or that was always just speculated?
That was based on Hamlet?
Yeah.
I mean, it was clearly based on Hamlet and like Kimba, right? And
right.
Yeah, I think that's pretty undeniable.
Well, sure. But I mean, I know they were pretty secretive about the Kimbo thing. Like they didn't want to like draw those comparisons. But I mean, I just never knew if they ever officially, like the directors are ever like, oh yeah, we took from Hamlet or whatever.
I mean, they can if they can say whatever they want. I mean, you just watch the movie is the evidence. Sure. Right.
But I mean, like certainly, yeah. Hamlet, I mean, it's an anagram of Hamlet, right? Like they all the same letters to switch around. So
it's just about. Yeah, I think it just has like an H in it, and that's the only. But So if you know the story of Hamlet, if you know the story of Lion King, the Northman, that's kind of where it begins, right? Like it's not fully like that story beat for beat, but it's pretty close. It takes place in I think Iceland, right? And so we follow a Viking king played by Ethan Hawke. His name in the movie is King Aruvandil Warraven. I don't know how to pronounce these things correctly, and I saw conflicting things. Like some of it said like, oh, this is Iceland. Other places saw like, no, maybe this is more like Irish, like the Irish coasts, and like this is just where they've set up like a kingdom. I don't know 100%. I'm going to say right now, I don't know a ton about Vikings. Viking knowledge, I didn't watch the show Vikings, and like I know Norse mythology because of Thor, but like sure. I'm not super. I might say a few incorrect things, so I apologize in advance.
Yeah, my pool of Viking lore and history is admittedly limited as well.
Yeah. I'm seeing here that apparently part of this movie does take place in Iceland, but where the kingdom itself is apparently is the Irish coast. So I'm going to stick with that for now. But essentially, we follow Ethan Hawke's king in the very beginning. He has a young son in this movie. I forget the young actor's name. I didn't recognize him from anything else. Oscar Novak. That's what I'm seeing here. And he is the Simba of the story, right? He's Hamlet. He's like, oh, my father is like the king. And then there's like a plot to overthrow his father. Before we get to all that stuff, we also get to know first of all, the evil uncle, as we will get to know further, is Fjolnir, played by Claes Bang. And then we have Nicole Kidman, who plays his mother. And then we have Willem Dafoe as this character named Hymir, who's considered he's like Hymir the Fool, essentially. And I got to get something out of the way, Will, because, I had a little bit of an issue with one thing with this movie. That's a me issue. I had a hard time understanding some of the dialogue. I really want to rewatch this movie with subtitles because it was just hard for me to catch what they were saying. I don't know if it was the mixing. I don't know if it was the theater, but there were a few things that like I just totally missed. And I was like, wait, and I wasn't sure if that was me or if it was like if it was a tragedy in Macbeth situation or if it was just sort of like a sound issue. But if I was able to read things, maybe it would have been easier for me to get like, oh, that's why that character is doing that. That's why that character is capable of doing that. What do you think?
I don't remember directly having issue with the dialogue, but I mean, I feel like the movie itself avoids being dialogue focused and is more obviously about the visuals and communicating what's saying visually, just by nature of Eggers' style, like we said, being so keenly influenced by German expressionism and silent films and the like. So I mean, I never had an issue following the story. Also, just the fact the general story, kind of follows that well-established template going back to the Scandinavian legend itself. So I don't think there's ever a point where I was like lost or confused outside of like.
Yeah, like I was never lost or confused. Yeah. I'm just saying. I think there were just some world building details that I might have just missed. Even though, like, yeah, for sure, I could follow like what the characters were feeling. There were so many context clues and things like that. But yeah, I guess there were just some little minor things of like some of the rituals, some of the why they were doing certain things in certain scenes that I was a little bit like I was a little confused, but I wasn't like baffled or anything like that. I could kind of pick up on the idea.
Okay, cool.
So. Okay, and then we follow the Oscar Novak essentially escapes an attempt on his life. His uncle Fjord takes over, and we kind of catch up with him later as Alexander Skarsgård grown up, and that's kind of where the movie really picks up. That's where we kind of follow him as like a Viking raider. I think that's where the story takes place in Iceland, and he's just this brutal, man's man who's still like fixated on one day avenging his father and saving his mother, and then he might get a chance to do that. He eventually runs in with Anya Taylor-Joy, her character Olga, who is like, I think supposed to be some sort of witch or sorceress or clairvoyant. Like there was something with her character in that respect that I didn't fully understand. But again, I might need subtitles. But yeah, she kind of goes along with him on a mission to avenge his family. So yeah, Will, this is quite a movie. It's unlike anything I think people are going to see. It's not PG-13. It's a blockbuster action movie where there is blood. There's a lot of intensity. There's a lot of violence, and it's really well made. It struck me as like, what if Alexander Inarritu made a good movie? That's my sort of explanation for. Sorry, I'm trying to be mean to Alexander Inarritu.
Not to get sidetracked, but why is that always like a thing where people like make fun of Inarritu? Like I get like some things like I don't know, just like he's like always like a punching bag.
Oh, I don't know why he's a punching bag. I'm just going to speak for me. I think that he's not a very good filmmaker, but he has I think Deakins and Lubezki. I think mainly is it really Lubezki? I think Deakins actually. I think Deakins is the person who really makes his films have as much personality and awesomeness as they do. But I think
Lubezki is. I think
it's Lubezki. Okay.
Well, he shot his last two films at least.
I was thinking of
Birdman and The Revenant.
Okay.
But I don't know. I mean, is he a bit of a try-hard? Sure, but I feel like I've liked almost all of his films that I've seen, so I don't really get why people are always so tough on him. But I was thinking a lot of The Revenant in this film, and I was thinking like, even though I like that movie well enough, I was thinking like, this is kind of the feel I wanted from The Revenant. Certainly another revenge film, another film where it's like, being in the elements, seeing actors like roughing them up in the mud and, being out for bloodlust and revenge. I think this movie is better at kind of communicating that in a way that, I really love that Eggers' style is able to blend these sort of like mythical and with the like ethereal or in like with this like sense of like
ethereal?
There is this really ethereal, yeah, sorry, like this sort of like grounded, very real heavy aesthetic with something that also has like this sort of like mysticism and the sense of like you're in like a sort of like supernatural realm at the same time, and those blending of two elements I think really came alive here in some really key ways. I think that makes the text really come to life and feel singular to his style. And like I said before, I was saying that I feel like this movie, what really justifies it is you're saying like it's a big blockbuster, it's a big film that costs almost $100 million. It's clear a lot of money went into this, but it feels very singular to Robert Eggers. Like it feels like a movie that he made is from his vision, and it is a natural extension of his style. And to me, that's what I find really inspiring and refreshing and ultimately very entertaining and rewarding about this film for sure.
Yeah, like I think if I have a criticism of this film, I'll weigh it against the thing I really like about it. I think my main criticism is that there are certain aspects of the plot that I think are just a little bit too straightforward in like the final act. I guess I just sort of, I don't know, by the time we get to that point in the movie, it started to feel less Eggers to me. I think like that subversion, that's sort of like what he can do with this and maybe say something different, kind of, I don't know, went down an expected route. And I don't know, maybe that's the limitations of the folklore, but I think that is at the same time weighed against that. He takes a straightforward story and he tells it in a not straightforward way. I think like it's a brilliant move to kind of going off of what you're saying about the supernatural stuff to sort of get across this idea that essentially like we could sort of speculate that the Viking mythology, the Norse mythology, the idea of like Valkyries and Valhalla and all this stuff was absolutely drug fueled, and you know, sort of like setting up the brutality of that life as something of like these people were on all kinds of like heavy stuff in order to like cope with their realities, with their brutal realities. I saw some criticisms of this film that I heavily disagree with, like people kind of being like, I can't root for this character, I can't feel something for this character because he's apathetic, you know, toward the suffering of others. You know, there's a whole like a pillaging scene in this movie where he just like doesn't care that like other kids that were in the same position as him are getting like swept up and killed because of his actions. And I'm kind of looking at that and I'm like, if Eggers had tried to do that, if he tried to shoehorn this character who like has like a conscience and has a morality, it would be a different story. It wouldn't be this story. I think that it would be shoehorning in an element of morality that I don't think this character has. And I don't think we need to follow. I think we keep having this discussion. We don't need to follow pure white characters. I say pure white, like Snow White, you know, Snow. And I'm not talking about like racial stuff, but I'm talking about like these characters that have to be like, oh, well, they have like a morality that we can connect with. It's just sort of like trying to put our modern sensibilities into this story, and I just don't think that would serve the story. I think it would come off as inauthentic and it would ring super false. So I appreciate this. I think people are like thinking that it's an endorsement or something, or of like, you know, we're going to be like washing ourselves in this like violence and like enjoying it. It's like, no, we're watching a tragic figure. Like it's it's like the idea of like, if you're reading a history lesson, you're just getting the history of it, like the brutality and the horrible stuff that went on. You're not getting this sort of painted, like maybe they felt this way, maybe they felt bad for the people. No, that's not doing any of that.
Yeah, I mean, with Eggers, I feel like he seems to really be a type of guy or type of filmmaker that like sort of follows his gut. Like he has like a very deep reverence for history. Like he goes to painstaking lengths to like make this historically accurate and feel at peace with its time. But at the same time, like in terms of like story crafting and how he tells a story, from what I can gather, like he feels like it's very much like I'm kind of following like the dream I had in my mind. Like I'm just like, whatever I feel is right for the story, that's where I'm going to take it. And I know in that New Yorker piece I read that he was saying that like when people are like, oh, like The Witch was such a revolutionary feminist text, he's like, well, I'm glad you got that, but it's like that wasn't really actually my intent. Or like the same thing with like, oh, like The Lighthouse is like this, you know, brutal sort of funny take on toxic masculinity. It's like, well, now I can see that when you point that out, but like I was just kind of following what I felt was true to like what that story was supposed to be. And that's something I find really fascinating about him, and something I kept in mind when I was watching The Northman, as far as like it seems like he just kind of follows like what he feels is true, and that kind of adds naturally to that sort of, like you said, or like what I said, that like sort of mysticism or like that dream-like quality where it's just like there is a sort of seamless blend between the supernatural and the like nature and elements of reality, and just that balance of the two is something that I just find to be really sort of intoxicating under his vision.
Yeah, I want to point out something based on what you said there, right? This idea that like he didn't intend, you know, for these movies to be about what they're about. And I think that's totally, like, if he's saying that, I think that's valid and true. But I do want to make it clear for people who might, like, you know, not be as familiar with the creative process, or maybe they are and they're just kind of like, well, what is it, right? We all have like worldviews. We all have kind of like, you know, you write down like on a sheet of paper what you think about certain things. When you create things, it's going to show up there, even if you don't intend it. Like these stories about like what he really believes about certain things, if he's feeling it out as he's writing these movies or co-writing these movies and making them, he has like these points of view as he sort of like, you know, as he is claiming, like sort of improvising where things go. Obviously, like who you are, what you believe, all that stuff influences what you think is a good idea for like where a story will go, why a character will do something, who is that character, and why do they believe what they believe. And so what I like about Eggers in that respect is that he just seems to have a point of view about masculinity, about machismo, about human beings in general that is this, I think, realistic blend of amoral, immoral, and moral. And I think it's very fascinating to see how he plays them out in these like sandboxes he's created. I think that a lot of directors, where they can sometimes falter, especially when they're also writing the film, is that sometimes you just get this sense that like there is no cohesion between like what the director really believes and what is coming out on the screen, because that happens a lot. That's why we don't like studio interference when that becomes an issue, when it just feels like it's a committee sort of developing the points of view of that film. You just don't really get that with Eggers. It just seems to be like he has a lot of control over, where this stuff really lands. Now, I know there were some rumors. People were saying like, oh, is there a director's cut? Some people claiming like he might have wanted to be a little bit longer with some extra stuff thrown in. He's kind of denied that, but I kind of wonder, there could be truth to that, right? There could be like some extra things that might have been taken out because of the runtime, right?
Sure. I imagine his like initial cuts were just probably like longer, maybe a little bit more like lethargic, like maybe a little bit more like seeped into the wool, you know what I mean? And by his admission, he said like this is the most entertaining version of the film. Like he's not ashamed of it. It's not like he's like Josh Trank, where he's like, this is not my cut or whatever, coming out and being like against the film. Like he's proud of it. And I think he said that to sort of avoid that kind of conversation, as if like he's dissatisfied with the studio or whatever. And I don't get that sense. If he says otherwise later on, I don't know. But from what I can tell, it seems like he's trying to make sure that he makes it clear, like, if I could produce a longer version, sure, why not? Like, I mean, it may not be exactly like 100% what I had in mind from the get-go, but this version of the film is not like a lesser version of that. And so, I mean, certainly I have admired it if he could have gone deeper with that, sure, but I think the film really works on its own terms as it is.
Yeah, I think it works on its own terms. I know there's a question right now about accessibility. Right, it's like who's going to be able to watch this and get the most out of it. Obviously, this ain't a Marvel film. This isn't a PG-13 superhero blockbuster the whole family can go out and enjoy.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, before I forget, kind of going back to your one point, I feel like those ideas, like if he tried to enforce the like modern ideas, I think what I find telling about like him incorporating those sort of almost like incidentally is that like I feel like the movie becomes more modern because he's just like telling the story he wants to tell. And then those ideas start to come up because, like you said, they're in his mind, but he just may not realize it until like it's laid out in the text. And I feel like if he had like been conscious of that and been like, oh, I have to have a scene where he's like protective or does something, it's like that's just going to backfire, because like, well, what if he's like a white savior then or whatever? I feel like what he's doing is already working on its own terms. I'm not quite sure what people are complaining about, but I just wanted to say that before I forgot.
I think sometimes, some people have different approaches to how they review a film. Some people will meet, like we're saying, like they'll meet a film on its own terms. They will sort of say like, you know what, look, this movie doesn't perfectly coincide with every little thing that I believe about things. Some people are a little bit more balanced on it. Some people are like, there are things about this movie that I really enjoy. There's some things about the theming and the messaging that I couldn't get on board with. And so I have a few issues, in that regard. I think that's where most people probably land, like people who do this professionally. And I think some people go maybe a little bit too far, a little bit of like, we shouldn't take any of that stuff into consideration. It doesn't matter. It's like, no, this stuff does matter. There are certain things you can put into a film that, underwhelm or undermine what you're trying to say about the film, that can come off as scattered and barbaric and regressive, right? Like there's a total balance to this stuff. I think with this movie, I think it's a really good balance. I think that it actually, there's enough to chew on here where you can't just explain the whole sort of what this movie is and why it is in like a couple of sentences. Like it's something you kind of have to unpack. And I think that exercise is good because you can certainly get a lot of different interpretations out of a text like this. Now, making it sound like this film is some sort of like detailed, lore focused, like super, super cerebral movie. It isn't. It's just kind of it's kind of a blast of a movie. It's just very epic and very bloody and intense. There's just like stuff in the in-betweens that those are the things that fascinated me the most. The action set pieces are really obviously well done. They keep the movie moving, where I think I was getting a little bit like, this is not slowing down, but I thought there was a little bit less of like a rising action to the film, where I felt like we were escalating to better and better stuff. It started to feel like it was sort of going like on an even plane of just like of stuff that was really exciting. Don't get me wrong, like really intense action still, but it was never quite like stepping it up upon itself in certain moments, especially with that early pillaging scene. I think that one is just like such a like landmark of the film, and very few stuff that happens after it kind of ever comes to its level. So at least for me, when I was sort of like expecting or hoping for a little bit more of a ramping up, didn't quite get that, which I'm sure some people would be like, that's fine. That's not what I really wanted from this movie. But what did you think?
Well, maybe we will have to discuss spoilers, because I find that there's some stuff in the end that's really fascinating and kind of subverts my expectations. Certainly one scene with Nicole Kidman in particular, but even more so another scene with Anya Taylor-Joy, where I feel like the movie is casually sort of subversive in what it's saying there. Not that it doesn't play out in the way you would expect, but it suggests something that I found a little bit more resonant than I think maybe I expected going into it. But I do agree. I think there is a fear, and maybe this is something that we really should stress, because it might turn some people off from seeing the film, is that like it's not like this, like it's not like watching homework or something. Like you don't have to like have like a deep knowledge of Viking lore or anything like that to really appreciate the film. I think on its own terms, it's actually really entertaining and, a more commercial certainly than I think anything I would have expected from Robert Eggers based on his previous two films. But what I find so impressive and so rewarding is that it is able to be very true to his style, but able to also be accessible to a wide audience to suggest that he can, find that balance in a way that I honestly didn't even expect from The Witch or The Lighthouse.
I saw some marketing for this movie likening it to this generation's Gladiator. I just wanted to get your quick read on that. What do you think? Because Gladiator, also a kind of, big deal of a film for like grown-ups, I guess, grown-up audiences, kind of a throwback, and also kind of a film about revenge. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think about that comparison?
I mean, I get it, but it's also kind of superficial, I feel.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, but I kind of wanted to get your take.
Weirdly, this movie reminds me...
You can't really compare these movies.
Yeah, I don't know. Weirdly, this reminds me more of like Apocalypto.
Really?
Yeah. Have you seen Apocalypto?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're picking up on there, but I guess to some degree. But I think where we can, certainly I was kind of starting with this point earlier. I kind of forgot about it, but I think it's interesting that a movie like this is coming out with such a big budget when we're in this weird sort of like new normal for action blockbusters, where a lot of them have to be like superhero. They have to be part of like these big tentpole franchises. This is not a tentpole franchise. We were joking about the IP thing earlier, but it's not a movie that's marketed based on your familiarity with this Viking character, right? This isn't like a movie where you see it and you're just like, I know what that is. I know exactly what to expect. I know that, I mean, it does have the Hamlet story, but I don't think that's like a plot thing, right? That's not a sort of like, I know these characters already, and it's also not like, oh, we're going to watch the end credits scene and see what the next 3 movies are going to be about. And that's what we've gotten used to. That's what's making money right now in the Hollywood system. So I'm kind of, watching this movie and I'm not expecting it to do amazingly well. It's going to be hitting this weekend and we'll see. I mean, it's already out in some territories. I think it's made a handful of $1 million. I don't know. Do you see this being a success, or do you see this being sort of like an outlier of like, yeah, this is one of those movies that's just like not like the other movies that are coming out, and there's that?
Well, I mean, I have no idea if this is going to be commercially successful. I would hope it is. I mean, it seems like, generally speaking, like people I've talked to, not even just critics, like general audiences that I've talked to or heard about who have seen the film already, because it's already came out like in the UK and outside the US. So it is kind of gradually out already, which I think is one reason why we were keen on doing this review a little bit early. But I think it has an audience. I think people, if they are willing to watch it, will like it and enjoy it, maybe even more so than they anticipate. But I don't know if that's going to translate to being a full out, like whatever it needs to make to be a complete success, like $200 million triumph or whatever, $200 million triumph. I would hope so. I mean, I certainly would love if this became a huge hit, because I want a movie like this to succeed, because it's like that balance, like we said, of something that is so grand, so like commercially accessible, but also very singular to one filmmaker, something that doesn't feel, like you said, beholden to a studio or a team of executives dictating all the decisions that go into it. It feels like a natural extension of a filmmaker using their vision to make something that is true to themselves, but also able to reach a broad audience and have a big canvas to play in. And I would like to see other filmmakers I like have this opportunity if they want to pursue it. But I don't know. I mean, I just really hope people seek it out. That's why I've been really making a point of championing as much as possible. And I mean, you know, we're playing at the art house where I work, and it's kind of a weird thing where it's like, you know, we don't usually play blockbusters, but it feels more appropriate than usual like film. And it's like that nice marriage of art house and, you know, big studio fare. And I would love to see more movies like that come to the fold and be accessible and as good as I feel as this movie is. But will that translate? I have no idea. My cynic brain would say probably not, but that optimistic side of my brain is also kind of like, maybe, hopefully. I sure would like it to be. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm kind of there with you with the cynic brain, because this isn't A24. This is Focus Features, and I think Focus Features has had a hit or miss record with trying to get like these sort of big movies making big money. And I think A24 has too, obviously, but I think that they've found ways to make things like Midsummer and Hereditary, you know, marketable successes through the marketing, like finding that audience, like you're saying. Projection wise right now, this movie is only expected to gross $5 to $10 million in its opening weekend. And yeah, for a budget this big, it's the writing on the wall for this is saying like, this might be a pretty sizable flop. I hope that's not the case, but I mean, we are looking at, it has about 2 weeks to itself in terms of like its audience before, you know, we get like Doctor Strange, and that's just going to suck up all the oxygen out of these movie theaters, like quite literally with all like the theater rooms that it's probably going to dominate. You know, next week is kind of it's a slew of sleepy releases, and this is competing with The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent and The Bad Guys and other family films. So it's not like it's going to have like a ton of space to itself ever. So I think it's a weird time to release this movie too, you know, but we'll have to wait and see, I guess. I'm not feeling good about it. And I that makes me sad, because I want this to be a really successful movie. I should also then mention, by the way, Universal has the international rights. So we'll see how the international box office does, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the writing is totally on the wall for it to be a flop, because it's, you know, still coming out. And I mean, you know, it has the opportunity to maybe not be a huge hit, but maybe not be an outright flop. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would be more inclined to assume it's not going to be a huge hit, but I want it to be a hit because I want movies like this to keep going. Certainly.
Yes,
so
same here.
Yeah, and I would love Eggers, you know, keep doing his thing, though he seems maybe potentially discouraged from doing blockbusters after his experience, which is unfortunate, but not the end of his career, certainly. So yeah, we'll see. I don't know, but I say if you can see it, by all means, seek it out on the biggest screen you can.
I am curious what he's going to do next, you know, because I haven't heard about him slating any projects for the upcoming, you know, next few years. I haven't heard anything.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing was just that Nosferatu remake, which might have fallen through. I know Anya Taylor-Joy has been attached for a long time. I guess apparently Harry Styles was also attached, and he dropped out of the project for whatever reason. So that's been a stumbling block for that project. But I don't know. I hope whatever he wants to do, whenever he chooses to do next, I hope it comes together.
Yeah, I think the troublesome thing for Eggers is that The Witch, people, you know how producers in Hollywood are. They just look at the numbers. They don't look at the critic scores necessarily. Like they look at The Witch and they're like, okay, yeah, that made like $50 million off of like a $4 or $5 million budget. It was a huge success. But then Lighthouse made way less, right? And so, and the Lighthouse cost more. It was like, I think like $10-11 million budget, and it still made some money probably, depending on the marketing budget. But I think it made like a little less than $20 million. And so that's like a huge like drop down. And then with the Northman, I don't know, Will, even if you're gracious with it, let's say like after marketing and everything like that, this would need to gross like something like 120 million, maybe like 115 million. I don't know if this
probably 200 to be a hit.
I'm being nice, yeah, because it probably is higher than that. And I kind of don't know if this is going to make more than $30 million. Maybe like I think $30 million box office is actually kind of possibly overestimated domestically, to be clear. So yeah, I'm nervous, but I'm gonna I'm going to let the cards fall where they may. So
I don't know. I mean, like I said, all we can really do is encourage people to see it if they, I know we're still in a pandemic and stuff. So if you feel safe and inclined to do so, but
chances are it's not like there will be a lot of people in the theater. So
yeah, I don't know. But if you can, certainly do see this film.
Okay. I guess we can play the Rotten Tomatoes game then on that note.
Okay.
America's favorite
are we
game
not doing
show.
Spoilers, or are we?
Well, if we do spoilers, we would do the Rotten Tomatoes game first.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I guess it's up to us. Okay, so we have 130 reviews counted for the Northman, and so Will, what do you think the Rotten Tomatoes score is at this point?
At this present moment, I would have to say 84%.
Your guess is 84%. And I literally had to refresh because I had a feeling it's probably changing all the time because the reviews are still like a lot of them are being counted. And sure enough, the score just changed. It went a point higher. It's at 89%.
Okay.
Out of 131 reviews now.
It was 88 before?
It was 88 before, yeah, out of 130. Obviously, no audience score yet. So, yeah, you're about 5 points off. You were closer. If only I hadn't hit refresh.
Alas.
Yeah, and I kind of browsed some of the Rotten reviews. A few people that I know and I trust and I appreciate. I shouldn't say a few. It was like literally like 2 or 3 people where I was like, oh, they didn't like it. Okay, but yeah. And then let's do the Letterboxd because we don't have the cinema score. Obviously, the folks in Vegas haven't even checked it out yet, probably. So that's still being tabulated. But let's
mulling it over how they feel about the film.
However, on Letterboxd, this thing's already at 21,000 watches. That's kind of shocking a little bit. Apparently, a lot of people have seen this on Letterboxd that are probably internationally, which is encouraging. 21,000 is way more than films we've talked about before they've actually come out. So that's encouraging for sure. So, Will, what do you think the average Letterboxd rating is?
3.6?
4.1.
Wow.
Check that out. That's really good. So that kind of gives me the sense that like the people who are seeing this early and international, fans, cinephiles and all them, they're rating it pretty highly. And I'm seeing that also in terms of the people I follow in Letterboxd. Like, let's see, the lowest score I'm seeing here is, I think, just 3 stars. Oh, no, that's not true. I saw a few lower down. I saw one person give it 2 and one person give it 2.5. One of those being somebody who gave it a rotten review on Rotten Tomatoes. So that tracks, I guess. But yeah, I'm mostly seeing like 4s and 3s and 3.5s, handful of 5s and 4.5s. Actually, I should only say, I think I saw 3 5s, 1 or 2 4.5s. So yeah, good stuff. Kimber Myers, friend of the show, gave it 4.5. So happy to see she enjoyed the film quite a bit.
Yeah. Good old Kimber.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all we have for the main part of this like bonus app. Is there anything you wanted to bring up that we can, that is spoilery about the movie? So if people haven't checked out the film, which I imagine most people, they could bow out now if you wanted to talk about anything else. What do you think?
So talk about spoilers now?
Yeah, if you want to. Is there something specific you wanted to bring up? And before you do, we'll just say, like, all right, listeners, if you don't want to be spoiled and you're coming into this, before the movies come out, you haven't seen it, you might want to dip out, but we'll see you on the next one. But okay, well, Ashton, what's up?
Yeah, I mean, for me, something I find kind of fascinating about the film, and I wanted to talk to you about it, is this idea that, like, the whole film is centered around this guy who, like, his fate is basically dictated for him from, like, a pivotal point in his life where he becomes a man. There's, like, that ritual with Willem Dafoe where it's like, this is your last tear, and it's like, this will be, like, used later. Like, his, like, life is laid out before him after this tragic scene that happens thereafter. But, like, as he progresses and goes about his journey, like you said, like, there's a scene where he's, like, conflicted about, like, helping the villagers and stuff. But it's like, ultimately, I have this thing I have to do. It's my fate. Like, to get to Valhalla, I have to do this, even if I have to, like, avoid these terrible things that are happening. But when he meets up with Nicole Kidman's character, his mom, like, he's, like, thrown for a curve because, like, basically everything that he once knew was maybe not a lie, but, like, clearly not what he once thought. And he's, like, kind of thrown aback, and he's with Anya Taylor-Joy's Olga at one point, and he's given the opportunity of like kind of avoiding what his fate was, like living a happier life that he's so like, you know, he's clearly already on the path of becoming this like father for you know, a new generation, kind of like avoiding the mistakes that his father once made, and he ultimately chooses to still you know, go about what his predestined fate was. And there's this kind of complicated, intriguing morality there where it's like, is his fate truly determined? Like, is there that, like, and it kind of lends that to like spirituality of like, you know, is there like that supernatural pull where he has to do it because he has to honor himself, like this, like, you know, clear identity of masculinity, of like kind of living up to the true idea of like what a man is, even down to that like primal naked fight at the end? Or is he like just like, it's just like a tragedy because he just cannot avoid what he feels like was destined, because, you know, it is what he's known his whole life. I just want to talk about that with you.
I mean, yeah, you're literally just being like, that's the core of the movie, isn't it? And I think, yeah, we kind of danced around it, but I think that's the thing that I appreciate about the brutality of his character being so immoral and doing these horrific things. And I think where I just personally think some people are missing the point of who he is and why we root for him. We don't root for him because, like, I think if he did have this like burst of morality in terms of like, I don't want to pillage, these are innocent people, it would make sense within the context of the character. The character, like you said, is ruled by this, like, all he cares about is fate. He doesn't care about other people. He is somebody who has gone through these horrific things, and he is desensitized to it by his culture. His culture is very desensitized to violence. It's like sort of like the way of the world that he knows. And I think that like this movie is sort of about how he can sort of get outside of that. It's not like he is perfectly, at least my takeaway, he's not perfectly locked into this cycle of violence. But I think the movie is just sort of like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy is how I take it away. It's like, it's not that fate, he has no choice. It's that he has a choice, but it's dominated by him believing he doesn't have a choice. And that's like the definition of self-fulfilling prophecy. I took it as Eggers sort of saying like, these things happen. And then these people, like, masculinity comes down to choices. And, you know, we tell ourselves that there's no other way. We have to do these things because of honor and all of these intangible things that are supernatural and mythic, and they're not real. And that's what ultimately leads to the downfall of a person who believes that they have to go down this road. So I think that's where the movie certainly, for me, comes together and actually says something kind of profound to an extent.
Yeah, I just bring that up because I feel like people have this, like you said, like the critics of the film or the people who are going against it are kind of like, oh, it's just like simple by numbers revenge story. And I feel like if they had only watched maybe like the first half of it, I can understand that. And like maybe if they just only like catch the end of it and just like choose to avoid or just like ignore the more complex parts of the story that Eggers is clearly putting in there. I don't know. I just feel like the movie is a lot deeper than some folks are giving credit. Not that like this is like super complex or anything, but you know, it is, I think, like you said, deeper and more profound than some folks are initially giving it credit. And I just think that that's what really, to me, transcends the film from being like just like a really good film, but like truly like on par with what we've seen from Eggers thus far. So that's why I feel like the last half of it actually really stands out more than the first half. Though I can see why you find the first half to be a little bit more like electrifying in that respect.
And it's more in terms of like the action beats and everything like that. And it was like I was saying before, it's like it is a straightforward plot. The idea of him getting out of like carrying out his revenge, finally doing it. Like, I think all of that is what's straightforward. But I said this before, I think the way that Eggers does it and tells that part of the story is what is dazzling and profound. And then I do think that there are probably a lot of people watching this who watch it for the first time. I'm talking about critics here who, and people in the audience too, casual moviegoers, I think might just be so enamored or so like taken by the action and the spectacle of it that they might miss some of those things. I missed a lot of stuff. I think, like there were things that I wasn't fully sure about or confident in when I was watching the movie, because I was like, I could barely hear some of like what was actually being said. So I do think this could be one of those slow burn movies, like maybe down the road, people will be like, actually, like the second or third time I watched this movie, there were certain things that like popped out that I might have missed. Like I could totally see this being that kind of movie where people who are like, I thought it was like a B minus, eventually being like, actually, no, what, this is like a minus kind of movie. So that's my takeaway.
Absolutely, yeah, and I just imagine it will be a rewarding visit later down the road. I don't know if I'll get a chance to see it again in theaters, but certainly it's one I want to go back to in the same way that I would like to someday revisit The Witch and The Lighthouse for similar reasons. So I think Eggers is on the right path, man. I think he's doing some really cool stuff right now, and I applaud it wholeheartedly.
Since we're in the spoiler section, I gotta ask you, Will.
Okay.
Well, what was the reaction of your audience when Nicole Kidman kissed Alexander Skarsgård?
Nothing like audible.
Oh, my entire audience, everybody was like, oh, like it was such a reaction. Yeah.
I mean, I was with critics, so I don't know. Like, I'm not sure if you saw it with critics or general audiences.
Critics were probably just like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could definitely see like people like, I mean, listeners won't be able to see this, but for your sake, like they were just kind of just like, whoa, like, I mean, it's just funny to me that like, Nicole Kidman and Alexander Skarsgård, they play like partners,
husband and wife,
in Big Little Lies, and it's like, oh, it seems kind of reductive for Nicole Kidman to play, just his mother in this film.
Well, I was talking to somebody.
You watch it, it's like, oh.
Well, I was talking to somebody about how like she doesn't really age in the film, right? And there's something to be said about how like the characters in this are like dirty and like they are very like ragged and everything, but two of the main women in the film, Anya Taylor-Joy and Nicole Kidman, aren't. They're idealized, and I think Eggers, I take it as like we're seeing how he sees them. Seeing his mother, not as who she really is, but like a version of her that's still the mother that he remembers. And then same thing with Anya Taylor-Joy being a character who looks a lot like his mother. And so, I think all the Oedipus complex stuff is absolutely part of what Eggers is trying to get across with like the downfall and the tragedy of this man.
Yes, definitely. I mean, certainly like, I like that. Like when you watch the film first, like, oh, this is real Hamlet thing. And then it's like, oh, this is like an Oedipus Rex thing going on here. Yeah, that's me where I'm like, I'm just really like, I like the movie a lot in the beginning. That's where I'm like locked in. I'm like, all right, yes. Because before that, I'm kind of like Nicole Kidman's like doing a pretty good job here, but it seems kind of beneath her to do this type of role. But then she gets those scenes and it's like, oh, I see why you got Nicole Kidman for this movie. Like, There we go. That's what I'm talking about.
Because I'm sure a lot of people will see it coming too. I certainly was like, okay, we're going to get to a point where she was in on it, because like there's no way, or at the very least, even if she wasn't in on it, you just get the impression that she's happy with this new, I was saying like, oh, maybe it'll be this kind of thing where like she still loves her son, but her eldest son, but it's just sort of like, yeah, you know what? I actually prefer the uncle, I missed that part of that deleted scene in The Lion King. But yeah, I certainly was. I certainly like when that moment happened. I was like, oh wow, like Eggers is actually taking this a bit farther than I gave him credit for, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, and I think he's really good about doing that in general, and I certainly love that about The Lighthouse in particular. So yeah, I mean, I really hope that continues to be a trend throughout the rest of his career. But yeah, I mean, that's just me. I kind of going against what you were saying before. Where I feel like some people, because I have heard people say like, oh, like the second half kind of lags a bit, doesn't quite come together as well. And to me, I think the second half is what really completes the film and complements it in a really meaningful way. So. Yeah,
I think it's just missing a really good set piece. That's the only. It's like if you start with like, and I guess it doesn't start with that pillaging set piece, but like, you got to top it at least once in the second half, and it just never does. I mean, I guess some people will say that final like volcano sequence does, but I didn't think it did. I thought it was okay. It was cool, it was primal and everything, but I don't know. I think like some of the actual action filmmaking that happens in that pillaging scene is so incredibly well done. It's like The Revenant again, where it's like you start with something like that. I don't know. You it's like you're giving a promise to the people in the audience that you're going to, that this is what that movie is. But then you just sort of like, you do a lot of really good character work after that. You have some sort of like minor set pieces, but I think that, it's tough on a first time watch because it's like you're kind of getting geared up and then you're like let down. So I sympathize with people who are a little bit disappointed.
Yeah. I mean, you bring, one of my complaints I was going to bring up earlier, that since you bring up like the pillaging scene, which is a, badass scene, really impressive, single take shot, just truly, visceral, good filmmaking. But my only real complaint with that scene, some of the action beats in this, that because I think Eggers isn't, an action director, I kind of feel like there are a lot of beats and those things where it's kind of like, okay, I step here and hit the guy like that. It can feel a little bit like ritualistic at times in a way. It took me a little bit out of it. That was one of my few complaints with the film.
Really? I didn't have that same take. I didn't see it that way personally. I saw it was pretty well timed,
it's only in the, I know it is well timed, but just like some of the ways that they move, I can just kind of feel like I see the blocking of it in a way that doesn't feel as natural to me. And maybe it's just me kind of grin. I don't know. And it didn't like kill the movie at all for me. I still love that scene. I think that it's a great action scene, but I can just kind of feel like the blocking, the staging of it a little bit because it's so ritual based. I can feel like they're like, okay, we have to do this for like the 13th time. I do this, I go to that guy. Yeah, you know.
I guess I took it a different way. I think I just took it as like, he's so good at this. He's so like used to this. I took it as like, he is just meticulous and just able to predict everything that happens. So yeah, I guess I just had a totally different, experience with it. But yeah, I think that, what you're saying is super valid.
Sure. I mean, I still love the film. I love that scene. That was just one of my minor complaints with the film.
I like the way that Ethan Hawke dies is not epic. That to me is a really good move.
Starts kind of epic, like he gets the arrow in him and he like pulls out the knife like it's nothing.
That's the thing, it's like you're at a distance when he's trying to defend himself, and it's such an unceremonious end, but that's part of what's galling about it. They don't do something like, with Mufasa where he gets to have like his heroic moment, where he gets to do something kind of like, look how great he was. You don't get any sense that he was ever great. He's kind of like a weak, feeble person, and that only lends to sort of like the futility of what his son is trying to avenge the entire movie. I think it's kind of brilliant, actually.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, he's just kind of a weeb, like, or a dweeb. I mean, sorry, a dweeb.
And it's not even his fault, right? Because like he doesn't even get the chance to sort of have his like sword fight. He just gets arrowed down, and then the guy comes up and beheads it. Like, there's no sort of like honor to it at all. But it's sort of like, of course there isn't. Like, his uncle's in it to win it. He's not gonna, But it is interesting. It's not doing it's kind of like doing the Game of Thrones thing to an extent, where Game of Thrones like to undercut epic stuff like that until it didn't. But yeah, in the early seasons, like when it was actually about something, I think that can be very satisfying in how it's unsatisfying.
Sure. I mean, I will say, I'm not the biggest Game of Thrones fan, certainly, but I do appreciate that a show like Game of Thrones being as successful as it is certainly paved the way for a movie like The Northman getting greenlit and made. So have to give credit where it is due.
Yeah. I think I read that Eggers wanted to make this movie around that time when Game of Thrones was like coming out. So.
And I was gonna say, as far as the action beats, I think that's why I found I forget the game, but whatever it's called, like where they're like hitting each other with the bats and stuff.
The game where they're hitting each other. You're gonna have to
like with the ball,
baseball.
Like no, like what I mean, like where they're doing the game like midway through the movie, where it's like,
oh, in the movie, I thought you were talking about like a video game in our life. I was like, what are you talking? Yeah, that.
Yeah, I think that scene actually kind of impressed me a little bit more than the pillaging scene, because I felt like that stuff that I was talking about before wasn't as apparent there, and it felt more visceral to me.
It was a fun like sports mini game.
Yeah, I don't know, just like that's like probably the most violent scene in the film, and I also felt like you could feel like each hitting it and stuff. Like I was really taken by that scene.
It was brutal.
Yeah,
brutal is the word for this movie, that's for sure. Good movie. I think obviously, we both stand behind it and recommend people check it out. Of course, if you're listening at this point, you probably have seen it and are listening to our thoughts on it.
Sure.
But hey, maybe take a chance to recommend it. Obviously, it's not going to be for everybody, but I do think it is. I agree with you, Will. I think it has an audience. I think there are a bunch of people out here who if they gave it a chance, they would be super into it. But. It's just hard to market movies like this these days. If it's not like a Netflix original that you can just sort of like pop on immediately, people are just sort of like, whatever. That's why we're here.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, like what we were saying earlier, where it's like when people compare it to something like Gladiator, like it doesn't really fit for me, but I don't like shrug it off because it's like, okay, that might sell it to somebody.
Yeah. If that gets somebody in the theater, let's lie.
You know what I mean? Not lie, but because it's not like totally false. It's like a sort of
I don't want to set people
with
the wrong expectations.
I guess so. I mean, I just feel like I would hope that like the like mysticism and stuff that we're talking about surprises them. But I could see what you mean, where it's like that kind of turns them off. It's like, what is this? Like, I don't.
Yeah, because we should be clear. I mean, Gladiator is a very Americanized movie. It is very like Ridley Scott clearly like. There's a reason that movie has a lot of iconic dialogue, right? And this is not that kind of movie. This is not geared towards some sort of
I mean, is like I don't know. I haven't watched The Witcher, but isn't there like magic stuff in that?
Yeah, there is.
Could you say it's like The Witcher or whatever? Would that get people to see it?
No, because I think Witcher is so much more based on like the magic is so heightened, and it's much more lighthearted. Yeah, I wouldn't compare this. I would compare this much closer to Game of Thrones than I would The Witcher, 100%. And I think I have seen people say that it's of a piece with the Vikings show, which I haven't seen, so I can't say that with confidence. But yeah,
I haven't watched that either. I haven't watched The Witcher, and I've only seen one season of Game of Thrones. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to get people to be enticed to see the film.
Same here. Yeah, it's tough. The Revenant. Would you like The Revenant? That might not work. Okay, well, that'll do it for our show. Our little spoiler section here. Thanks again, as always, for listening. This coming weekend, we're going to be talking about at least 2 movies. The 2 we have in the docket are The Bad Guys, new DreamWorks animated film we mentioned last week, and then we'll hopefully also be able to talk about The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, the movie with Nick Cage, which I already saw yesterday. So or Monday.
I was gonna say The Bad Guys, the Cinemaholic story, and then The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, the John Negroni story.
Oh, dang.
Ain't that sweet?
We're too nice to each other, aren't we? Okay, but we'll be back, and then until then, you can find us on the socials and everything like that, and show notes have all the details if you'd like to support us and donate to us. Really happy to see the RRR episode doing super well. So thanks to everybody who gave that episode a chance and listened to it.
Yeah.
That's really cool because, speaking of movies we want people to actually go watch in the theater and support, the Northman
Double feature.
Yeah.
5 hours at the movie.
That's still playing.
Yeah. 9 hours at the movie then. Screw it.
You have a lot of time on your hands. We got good news for you. So, all right, we'll see you all later.